Jericho, Jericho. Joshua fought the battle of Jericho, and the walls come a-tumbling down. That morning Joshua fought the battle.
Hello. If you're an avid reader and quite interested in people, or like me, just a bit nosy, you may well enjoy reading two different kinds of books. Diaries, written on a day-by-day basis, usually recording impressions and events as they happen, and autobiographies, where somebody reflects on their own life, usually at the end of their career, and looks at the pattern and the sweep of their life, picking out things that they now realise were important or that they wish to emphasise. Now, both of those books will record events and some history and the things that happen to people. But of course, the perspective they bring is very different. For a diary written on a day-by-day basis will record a limited perspective, as people only understand things that are happening now. In an autobiography, you can look back across an entire lifespan and think about what was important, how this thing led to that thing, and realise that that thing that happened wasn't important, so we won't even bother to mention it. Now, we see the same thing in history books. So, for example, there's a great difference in perspective from somebody writing a diary, say, during the Blitz, to a historian writing about the Second World War after the event, where they can see how everything fits together. Now, why am I talking about this? Well, in reading Bible in the Year, we have just reached the end of the Pentateuch, and we are starting the book of Joshua, which is very exciting because it means we've read the first 5 books of the Bible. Now, for many, many years, people have recognised that Joshua starts a new section in the Bible, often referred to as the histories. And it's possible to read Joshua, Judges, 1 and 2 Samuel, 1 and 2 Kings in a continuous sequence, and to see that they form a single narrative, telling the history of the nation of Israel from the days after the death of Moses right up to the end of the monarchy and the Babylonian exile. And people also noticed that they were written in a similar style, not completely identical, but a similar style. And since the 20th century, scholars have suggested that this history looks much more like an autobiography than it does a diary. That is, it is written from one time with one perspective with the benefit of hindsight. So when might it have been written? Well, the best answer is probably in the years immediately after or possibly during the Babylonian exile. Why? Because this was such a traumatic event in the history of the people of Israel. A really seminal moment. The temple's destroyed, Jerusalem is destroyed, the monarchy is destroyed, the elite go off into exile. And it's at this time that the Jewish people really have to rethink their faith and their understanding of who God is and who they are. And it's at this time that the scriptures, as the cult, as the temple and sacrifice disappear, the scriptures become absolutely central. And the Bible probably begins to take the form that we know it today, even though it contains much older material. Who wrote it? Well, historians give a name to this person or group of people, more likely, and they call them the Deuteronomist. Now, I know what you're going to say. We've just finished the book of Deuteronomy. We don't want to go backwards. Don't worry, we won't. But they see similarities in the theological approach between Deuteronomy and these books. And in particular, these books take what is often called a Deuteronomistic perspective on events. That is, put simply, that good things happen to good people, bad things happen to bad people. More specifically, obedience to God leads to blessing and good things happening. Disobedience leads to bad things happening and all manner of war and disaster. And this Deuteronomistic perspective is clear to see in these books from Joshua to Kings, and we find much of the sort of the prequel in Deuteronomy, where Moses, as we've heard, repeatedly warns Israel to abide by the covenants and good things will happen, and if they don't, bad things will happen. And why they did this, why they edited the material together, is because they wanted to make sense of what had happened, and in particular, the disaster of the exile. Why had God seemingly abandoned them? What had gone wrong? And so the Deuteronomist, this group of people, probably in Jerusalem, put together, all edited together, the material they had, material from the northern kingdom, material from the southern kingdom, all these different ages of material, and they put it together in one continuous narrative. And they had interpreted events from that perspective, seeking to understand what had happened from that Deuteronomistic perspective. And all those themes that we encounter in Deuteronomy are there. Worship God alone, no idols, obey the covenant, justice is important, love God with all your heart. And when rulers and kings and peoples do those things, as the Deuteronomist sees it, things go well for the nation. And when things go badly, they don't. Now, we will see this repeatedly throughout these books. And we will also see what happens in autobiographies, which is people interpret events with the benefit of hindsight. And sometimes they omit certain events or facts that don't completely agree with that perspective. And they emphasize other ones. So, for example, in the book of Joshua, which we're just starting now, we will see some very difficult chapters, if we're honest, talking about the conquest of Canaan. And Joshua sets this out as a single event where, just as Moses predicted, the people of God would push out all the people who lived in the land of Canaan, and they would occupy it solely by themselves. Now, if we read Joshua, we would think that is what happened. But actually, other parts of this history, this narrative, especially Judges, but also Samuel, make it very clear that the other people were still in the land, and they were the neighbours of the Israelites for many years and centuries. And we know that because they were continually fighting one another. And there's lots of stories about David, for example, having trouble with Philistines and others. So we can see how the editorial perspective has suggested that things went much more simply than they did. Essentially, life is more complicated than often we would like to imagine. Now, there's much we could talk about with this, and there's a lot more to understand here. And I'm introducing some quite big historical concepts and some of the most important theological studies you can do at university or seminary. But what I would encourage you to do as we read these histories together is to interrogate the texts and see where that perspective comes in. See where we can see a Deuteronomistic perspective coming in. And then reflect on how we might wish to understand those, particularly when we recognize that other parts of the Bible reject that rather simplistic Deuteronomistic narrative that good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people. And we've already encountered one of those books together, of course, the book of Job. And we see that rejection also in the Gospels, where the most terrible thing happens to Jesus, the most wonderful of people. So, as we read these books together, I hope that we can reflect on them together and try to understand them more deeply and see where our own stories might fit into them and reflect upon our own lives and think about the stories that we tell about ourselves and our nations and our communities. So I hope that you will find something good, something meaty to reflect upon in these coming books. And I look forward to discussing them with you soon.
Jericho, 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 Joshua fought the battle of Jericho, and the walls come a-tumbling down. That morning Joshua fought the battle of Jericho, Jericho, Jericho,